Emma stood on the busy corner of Fifth Avenue, the sharp wind cutting through her thin jacket. The city around her buzzed with the usual New York energy, people hurrying to their destinations, honking cars, and the constant hum of voices. Yet, in the middle of all that chaos, Emma felt alone, almost invisible. The bright lights, the skyscrapers, and the dreams of millions didn't seem to matter when you had nothing left to give. Her hands trembled slightly as she held up a weathered cardboard sign. The words scribbled across it read, "Homeless and hopeful. Anything helps. God bless." She had made that sign weeks ago, but today, it felt heavier than ever. Emma wasn't just homeless in the physical sense. She was homeless in a deeper, more painful way. The past year had been one disaster after another: loss, betrayal, and fear. A year ago, she had a family, a job she loved, and a small apartment in Queens. But in a matter of months, it all came crashing down. Her father passed away in a car accident, and her mother, who was already struggling with health issues, became even more ill. The bills piled up, her savings vanished, and before she knew it, Emma found herself on the streets, with no one to turn to. As she watched people pass by, barely sparing a glance at her, she couldn't help but wonder, "How did I get here?" The question had plagued her for weeks, and every time she tried to find an answer, the pain of remembering her past life made her want to give up. But today was different. Today, she was determined to try something bold, something that could change everything. "Maybe I'll send a letter," she thought. Her mind raced as she considered who could possibly help her. Who in this city, this country, has the power to make a difference for me? And then, like a light bulb flickering on in her mind, it hit her. Donald Trump. He's a billionaire, a businessman, a politician. Surely, if anyone could help her, it was someone with the power and resources like him. The thought made her heart race, a mix of hope and disbelief. "Should I really do this?" she asked herself, staring down at the sign in her hand. What if he's just like everyone else, too busy to care? But what did she have to lose? She had already lost everything. And maybe, just maybe, this was the one chance she had left to turn her life around. Emma took a deep breath and began to write. Her fingers, stiff from the cold, moved across the paper with a mixture of desperation and hope. The letter would be simple, yet heartfelt. She would pour her heart out, explain her story, and plead for help. If it didn't work, she would be no worse off than she already was. But if it did, well, that was the kind of thought that could keep someone going through the darkest days. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," she whispered to herself, as if to remind herself that even in the darkest moments, there was always the possibility of a new beginning. Emma had always been a dreamer. Growing up in a small, modest home in the suburbs of New Jersey, she was the kind of child who believed the world was full of possibilities. Her father, Daniel, was a mechanic with a passion for cars, while her mother, Linda, was a nurse, always caring for others even when it seemed like she had little left to give herself. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they had something more valuable: love and hope. Emma remembered Sunday mornings spent in the kitchen, the smell of pancakes filling the air, as her father would tell her stories of his youth. Stories about overcoming obstacles, about working hard for everything he had. Her mother would hum along, preparing a breakfast spread, always with a smile, even if it was sometimes hard to make ends meet. Growing up, Emma's dream was always simple: to become a teacher, to make a difference in children's lives, just like the ones who had inspired her. She went to school every day with that dream in her heart, excelling in her classes, always motivated by the belief that education was the key to a better future. She imagined a life filled with joy, a career in a classroom, a family of her own someday. Nothing extravagant, but meaningful. But life, as it often does, has a way of throwing unexpected challenges your way. When Emma was 17, her world shifted. Her father, who had always been strong and invincible in her eyes, was involved in a terrible car accident. He survived, but the injuries were severe. He spent months in the hospital, and Emma, being the eldest, took on the role of caretaker. The financial burden was overwhelming. Her mother, already struggling with her own health issues, couldn't work as much, leaving Emma to take on odd jobs after school just to keep food on the table. It was during this time that Emma grew closer to her mother. She had always been the quiet, responsible child, but now she was everything her family needed. Her father's recovery was slow and difficult, and her mother's health worsened. Emma found herself balancing school, jobs, and caregiving, and slowly but surely, her once bright future began to dim. Still, Emma held on to hope. Despite the struggles, her family remained close, and her dream of becoming a teacher never wavered. She graduated from high school with honors and was accepted into a local college on a scholarship. But by then, the weight of the years had begun to take its toll. Emma's mother's health had deteriorated even further, and Emma found it increasingly difficult to balance her coursework and the responsibilities at home. She dropped out of college, her dream of becoming a teacher fading into the background as she devoted herself entirely to her family. It wasn't long before Emma realized that it wasn't just the financial burdens that were breaking her spirit. It was the emotional exhaustion of constantly putting others' needs ahead of her own. She felt trapped in a life that wasn't her own, but she didn't know how to escape. And then, just when Emma thought she might finally catch a break, everything fell apart. Her father passed away suddenly from complications related to his injuries, leaving her mother devastated and Emma feeling lost and alone. Despite her best efforts to keep the family afloat, Emma found herself overwhelmed by grief and the mounting bills. With no support system left, she made the painful decision to leave the family home and seek a fresh start, thinking she could make it on her own. But the world had other plans. She moved to New York City, hoping for new opportunities. But what she found was nothing like the dreams she had once imagined. The city, so full of potential, felt cold and indifferent. She bounced from one dead-end job to another, struggling to pay rent, until eventually, she couldn't even afford that. She spent nights in shelters, then on park benches, and finally on the streets, without a job, without a home, and with only the memories of a family she could no longer support. As Emma stood on that street corner in New York, holding her sign, the weight of the years came crashing down on her. But she couldn't let go of that spark of hope. It was the only thing that had kept her going, even in the darkest of times. She knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that if she was going to survive, she had to take that first step. And maybe, just maybe, reaching out to someone like Donald Trump, the man who seemed to have everything, was the only chance she had left. What do I have to lose? She thought, her fingers gripping the cardboard more tightly. It was time to make her move. The next few days were a blur. Emma spent every waking moment planning her letter. It consumed her thoughts, from the moment she woke up on a cold bench in the park to the late hours of the night when the streets grew quieter. She kept revisiting her words, making sure they conveyed her story, the truth of her pain, her desperation, but also her hope. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her voice stronger than ever. Sitting in a small corner of a crowded coffee shop, her breath fogging up the glass as the bitter cold of winter seeped into her bones, Emma typed away on her phone. The letter was simple, but it came from the heart. Dear Mr. Trump, my name is Emma, and I am reaching out to you in the hope that you might be able to help me. For the past year, I have lost everything. My father passed away, my mother's health has deteriorated, and I found myself on the streets of New York City. I've tried everything to make a fresh start, but I just can't seem to find my footing. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild my life, to get back on my feet. You've built a life of success, and I believe that if anyone can help me, it's someone like you. Please, Mr. Trump, I am begging you. Help me find a way out of this darkness. Sincerely, Emma. It was raw, emotional, and real. She couldn't hide behind the polished persona that the world expected. This was Emma, vulnerable, broken, but still standing, still reaching for something more. As soon as she finished, Emma hesitated. She wasn't naive. She knew the odds. Donald Trump was a powerful man, a billionaire businessman and former president. He was not the kind of person who would respond to a random plea from a homeless woman. Who was she, after all? Just another face in the crowd of millions. But still, something in her refused to let go of the possibility. What if this one letter, this one last chance, could change everything? With trembling fingers, she hit send. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt something like hope flicker inside her chest. It wasn't a guarantee, not by any means, but it was a step, one she hadn't taken before. Days passed. Each day, Emma checked her phone obsessively, waiting for a response that never came. She still stood on the street corners with her sign, hoping for spare change or some small act of kindness. People walked by, their eyes averted, as if they were trying to avoid acknowledging her pain. She felt invisible, insignificant in a city of millions. Then, one afternoon, as Emma was huddled in the corner of a cafe to escape the cold, her phone buzzed. She froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. The message read, "Emma, I've read your letter. Meet me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at Trump Tower. We'll talk." Donald Trump. Her heart raced. She couldn't believe it. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. Was this real? She reread the message, her hands shaking. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. Whether it was for better or worse, Emma didn't know. But this was the first real opportunity she had had in a long time. She needed to prepare. She needed to look presentable, to appear strong, even if she didn't feel that way inside. She spent the rest of the evening gathering what little she had. She had a clean shirt from a donation center, a pair of jeans that weren't as torn as the others, and a bit of makeup she had been given by a kind-hearted stranger at the shelter. Emma hardly slept that night. Her mind raced with questions. What would she say? What if he didn't really care? What if it was all a mistake? But more than anything, she was terrified. Terrified that this might be her last chance. Terrified that this might be a cruel joke. One more way for the world to tell her she wasn't worth saving. But despite the fear, she knew she had to go. This was her shot. The next morning, Emma took a deep breath and stepped into the streets of New York, her eyes focused on Trump Tower, just a few blocks away. She could see the towering structure, the glass windows reflecting the bright sky, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that something good could come from all this. Maybe, just maybe, I'll find my way out of this. But deep inside, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to face something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. The morning air bit at Emma's skin as she walked toward Trump Tower. The familiar chaos of the city seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet hum of anticipation that filled her chest. The towering skyscraper loomed before her, a symbol of wealth, power, and influence. She had seen it on TV, watched news reports featuring its shiny facade, but now, standing before it, Emma felt small, like a speck of dust in a world that didn't seem to notice people like her. This is real, she thought, her heart pounding. She straightened her shoulders, trying to appear confident, though inside she felt as fragile as a house of cards. Trump Tower stood like a monument to success, the world's elite constantly passing in and out of its gleaming doors. It was everything Emma had never been: wealthy, influential, untouchable. And now, somehow, she was about to walk through those very doors. She checked the time, 9:45 a.m. She had arrived early, not wanting to risk being late, even though the thought of walking in there made her stomach churn. A part of her was afraid this was all just a cruel joke, some publicity stunt that would go nowhere. But another part of her, the part that had kept her alive on the streets all these months, refused to give in to that fear. She had come this far. She wasn't turning back now. Emma walked up the stairs and entered the building, passing security with little more than a nod and a questioning glance. It was as if they didn't even notice her, just another person, another visitor. The lobby of Trump Tower was grand, a mixture of marble and glass, with gold accents everywhere. It felt like stepping into a world she didn't belong in. The polished floors reflected her nervous face as she hesitated at the reception desk. The woman behind it barely glanced up, continuing her conversation on the phone. "Excuse me," Emma said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here to meet Mr. Trump." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, her gaze finally landing on Emma. She studied her for a moment, eyes flicking from her slightly worn-out clothes to the hopeful look in Emma's eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone flat, as though it was a routine question. Emma nodded quickly, pulling out her phone to show the message. "Yes, I received a message from Mr. Trump." He said to meet him at 10 a.m. The receptionist's expression didn't change. She glanced at the phone, then at Emma once more, before picking up the phone on her desk and making a quick call. Emma's pulse quickened. Please, let this be real, she thought. A few minutes later, the receptionist hung up and motioned for Emma to follow her. Come with me, she said curtly, leading Emma to an elevator. As the elevator doors closed, Emma tried to calm her nerves. Her hands were clammy, and her heart raced. What was I thinking? She asked herself. Why would someone like Donald Trump even care about a woman like me? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor. The receptionist didn't say a word as she led Emma down a long corridor, past offices and conference rooms. Finally, she stopped in front of a large wooden door, its brass handle gleaming in the light. This is it, the receptionist said. Mr. Trump is expecting you. Emma took a deep breath. The door swung open, and there he was, Donald Trump, sitting behind a massive desk, his expression unreadable. He was exactly as she had seen on television, tall, imposing, his hair perfectly combed, a man who exuded power and confidence. For a moment, Emma froze. This is really happening. I'm here with him. Ms. Emma, Trump said, his voice rich and commanding. He stood up from behind the desk and extended a hand. It's good to meet you in person. Emma shook his hand, her mind spinning. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He motioned to a chair across from him. Please, have a seat. Tell me your story. As she sat down, Emma's nerves almost got the best of her. Her throat felt tight, and her words seemed to stick. But then she remembered why she was here. The years of struggle, the pain, the loneliness, and she forced herself to speak. I lost everything, she began, her voice trembling at first. But as she spoke, she found herself gaining strength. My father died. My mother is sick. I couldn't keep up with the bills, and soon, I lost my home. I've been living on the streets, doing anything I can to survive. I don't want to live this way. I just need a chance to start over, to rebuild my life. Trump didn't interrupt. He simply listened, his gaze steady and intense. When Emma finished, there was a long silence. For a moment, she feared he might brush her off, tell her that there was nothing he could do, that she was just another face in the crowd. But instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together in thought. I've heard a lot of stories in my life, he said, his voice calm but firm. But yours stands out. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Emma nodded, her eyes welling with tears. She quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show weakness. Trump leaned forward slightly. You've got guts, I'll give you that. You're not the first person to reach out to me, but you're the first one I'm meeting in person. I admire that. She blinked, unsure of what to say. I'll tell you what, Trump continued. I believe in second chances, and you deserve one. We're going to get you back on your feet. I'll help you get the resources you need to start over. But you've got to promise me one thing. Emma leaned in, desperate to hear what he had to say. You've got to promise me that you'll never give up. This is your shot, Emma. Don't waste it. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time, they weren't from despair. They were tears of relief, of hope. I won't, she whispered. I won't give up. Trump gave a small smile, the first one Emma had seen. Good. Then we've got work to do. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she wasn't alone anymore. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Emma. She could hardly believe that the man who had once seemed so distant and untouchable had reached out to help her. Donald Trump, the very person she had never thought would notice someone like her, was now offering her the chance to turn her life around. It felt surreal. Trump had arranged for her to meet with his personal assistant, Karen, who took Emma through a series of steps to get her back on track. First, they set her up with temporary housing at one of the buildings owned by Trump's organization. It wasn't a five-star hotel, but it was safe and comfortable, something Emma hadn't experienced in months. For the first time in a long while, she had a bed to sleep in, a hot shower, and a meal that wasn't from a food bank or a stranger's kindness. The following week, Karen helped Emma with a series of meetings, job training programs, counseling, and even a few courses on personal finance. Trump's team had pulled strings to make sure Emma had access to resources that would help her get back on her feet. She started to feel a sense of possibility that had been absent for so long. But there was still a nagging doubt in the back of Emma's mind. She had been burned before. She had trusted people, believed in the promises of others, only to end up disappointed. What if this was just another false hope? What if she was only a part of a public relations stunt? To quiet her doubts, she reminded herself why she had reached out in the first place. This wasn't just about getting a handout. It was about seizing the opportunity to rebuild. She had to trust the process and, most importantly, trust herself. Emma had survived too much to let fear dictate her future now. A month passed, and Emma found herself adjusting to the new rhythm of her life. She had a part-time job at a local cafe, one that Trump's team had helped her secure. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a step in the right direction. She attended classes to improve her skills and was slowly working toward getting her life back together. The weight of the world felt a little lighter with each passing day. Yet, with every new milestone, a new wave of doubt crept in. The media had picked up on her story after her meeting with Trump, and it had spread like wildfire. Some people were calling her a success story, proof that even the most hopeless cases could be saved with the right opportunities. Others, however, criticized her, saying that she was using Trump's name for attention, or that she was just another person trying to ride on his coattails. The backlash stung. Emma tried to ignore the criticism. She knew the truth. She was working harder than ever to build her future, and no one could take that away from her. But the constant scrutiny from the public began to wear on her. One evening, after a long day of work and classes, Emma sat down in her small apartment, staring at her phone. There were dozens of messages, some from people congratulating her on her progress, but others were laced with venomous remarks. It was the kind of hate she had grown accustomed to on the streets, but now it felt different. It felt personal. A message from an unknown number popped up on her screen. Curiously, she clicked it open. "Emma, I hope you're reading this. We both know this is all just a facade. You're only in this position because of him. Without Trump's help, you'd still be on the streets, just another face begging for scraps. You owe everything to him. But don't think you're better than anyone else. You're still just a homeless girl pretending to be something more." The words stung like a slap across the face. Emma read the message over and over again, each time feeling the weight of those words crush her spirit. She had worked so hard to get here, and yet, here it was again, someone trying to tear her down. The feeling of betrayal hit her hard. She wasn't sure if it was the message or the constant pressure of living up to expectations, but for the first time in weeks, Emma felt like giving up. She felt like the world was waiting for her to fail, just as it always had. But as she sat there in the quiet of her apartment, she thought of the journey that had brought her here. She thought of her father, of the sacrifices her mother had made, and of the years she had spent struggling to survive. She remembered how she had once believed she could never escape the cycle of poverty and despair. Emma took a deep breath and wiped away the tears that had begun to well up in her eyes. She wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't the one begging on the streets, hoping for a miracle. She had earned this. She had fought for it. And she wasn't going to let anyone tell her she didn't deserve it. With newfound determination, Emma composed a message back to the anonymous sender. "I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I'm working hard to rebuild my life. If you can't see that, then that's your problem. But I'll keep moving forward, with or without your approval." She hit send and immediately felt a sense of relief. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It was about proving it to herself. Emma's phone buzzed with another message, this time from Karen. The message read, "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know it's been a tough journey, but you're making real progress. Let me know if you need anything." Emma smiled, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders just a little. She wasn't alone in this after all. And maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around. As Emma sat back in her chair, she realized something important. The world could say whatever it wanted. She had already made it through the hardest part. She was no longer just a homeless girl. She was someone who was fighting for her future, and nothing, not the hate, not the doubts, was going to stop her from getting there. The journey was just beginning. As weeks passed, Emma's life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was progress. The weight of her past still hung over her like a shadow, but with each small victory, she was learning to manage it. Getting the job at the cafe was a step toward financial independence, and the classes she was taking were equipping her with new skills and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Emma felt like she was actively shaping her future. But as her life slowly stabilized, new challenges began to surface. The media buzz around her story hadn't died down, and it felt like everyone had an opinion about her situation, about her connection to Donald Trump, and whether her success was truly her own. While some hailed her as an inspiration, others were skeptical, accusing her of being nothing more than a pawn in a PR stunt. The messages, both supportive and hateful, kept coming in, adding to the pressure she was already feeling. One evening, after finishing her shift at the cafe, Emma sat on the small couch in her apartment, staring at the TV. It was another interview about her story. This time, a prominent news anchor was discussing her rise from homelessness to working at a cafe and the controversial connection to Donald Trump. Is Emma's success truly her own, or is it a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt by Trump's team? The anchor asked. Some critics believe she's just a symbol, used to promote Trump's image. But does she deserve all the attention? Or is she just another case of a poor girl getting lucky with a rich man's help? The words stung, and Emma's mind started to race. Do they think I didn't work hard to get here? Do they think I'm just some pawn in his game? She felt the anger building inside her. It was one thing to face the judgment of strangers, but this felt personal. She wasn't just Emma the homeless girl anymore. She was Emma, the Trump project. It was then that Karen called. Hey Emma, I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Karen's voice was soft, kind, but there was an edge of concern in it. Emma sighed, leaning back against the couch. I'm doing okay, but the media, it's exhausting. I feel like everyone's just waiting for me to mess up. They think I don't deserve this, like I'm just some charity case. I get it, Karen said, but you've come so far. Don't let their opinions define your journey. You know why Mr. Trump reached out to you. It wasn't for publicity. It was because you showed resilience. You didn't give up when the world turned its back on you. And that's what's important. Emma was silent for a moment, taking in Karen's words. The truth was, she wasn't just trying to prove the world wrong. She was trying to prove it to herself, to show that, despite everything, she could make something of her life. But it was harder than she had anticipated. As if on cue, another wave of doubt crashed over her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? What if I don't live up to the expectations? Emma asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. What if I just end up disappointing everyone? Emma, Karen said firmly, you've already proven that you're stronger than that. You've already overcome so much. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just keep going. Your future isn't in their hands. It's in yours. After the call ended, Emma sat in silence for a while, reflecting on Karen's words. The criticism, the judgment, it wasn't hers to carry. She didn't need anyone's approval. All she needed was to keep pushing forward. The next day, as Emma walked into the cafe to begin her shift, she found herself looking at things differently. She wasn't just a woman who had been given a chance by Donald Trump. She was someone who had worked tirelessly to rebuild her life, one step at a time. As she wiped down a table, her mind drifted back to the day she had met Trump at his tower. The man had made a promise to her, one that wasn't just about money or publicity. It was about something deeper, believing in the possibility of change, no matter where you started from. Emma took a deep breath and smiled to herself. The challenges would keep coming, but she knew she was ready. Her journey was hers to own, and no amount of media criticism could take that away from her. A couple of weeks later, she received another call from Karen. We've got something big, Karen said, her voice full of excitement. Mr. Trump wants to feature you in an exclusive interview. It's not just about your past, it's about your future. He wants the world to see what happens when someone gets a second chance. Emma hesitated. The media was the last thing she wanted to deal with right now, but she knew this wasn't just about publicity. This was her opportunity to take control of her narrative. I'm in, Emma said, her voice steady. The day of the interview, Emma sat in a well-lit studio, her heart racing. The interviewer, a well-known journalist, smiled as she looked at Emma. "So, Emma," the journalist began, "your story has captivated millions of people. You went from being homeless to working at a cafe with the support of Donald Trump. But let's talk about what happens next. What's your plan for the future?" Emma took a deep breath, the weight of the question settling on her shoulders. But this time, she wasn't intimidated. This time, she knew exactly what she wanted to say. "I'm not here to make anyone feel sorry for me," Emma began, her voice clear and strong. "I'm here because I believe in second chances. I believe that no matter where you come from, you can change your life if you're willing to put in the work. The help I've gotten from Mr. Trump and his team is just the beginning. Now, it's up to me to take the opportunities I've been given and make something of them." The interviewer nodded, impressed by her confidence. "So, what's next for you?" "I'm going to finish my education, get a better job, and eventually, I'm going to help other people who've been where I've been. I know how it feels to be invisible, to feel like the world has forgotten you. I want to give back, and I'm going to do that." The interview ended on a positive note, and Emma left the studio with a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt before. She knew there would be more hurdles ahead, but she was ready for them. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a fighter. As the lights of the city sparkled around her that evening, Emma felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a story anymore. She was the person writing her own future. And that, she realized, was the most important thing of all. The journey wasn't over, but she had finally started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. It had been a few months since the interview, and Emma was starting to feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her more than ever. The media buzz had died down somewhat, but she couldn't escape the scrutiny of her past. Everywhere she went, people recognized her from the story about the homeless girl saved by Trump. She had become a symbol, but not one she entirely felt comfortable with. The cafe job had become routine, and while it wasn't glamorous, it provided stability. Emma continued with her classes, determined to finish her education and build a better future. But something was missing. Despite the progress she had made, she felt a void, like there was a piece of herself she was still searching for. One cold morning, after another sleepless night, Emma sat in her apartment, staring out the window at the bustling city. She had come a long way, but the past kept tugging at her. Memories of the street, of being ignored, of not knowing where her next meal would come from, they hadn't faded. And sometimes, they felt more real than the life she was trying to build. She reached for her phone, scrolling through social media as she sipped her coffee. The comments were a mix of praise and criticism, just as they always had been. But one particular comment caught her eye. It was from a user she didn't recognize, and it simply read, "You'll never be free from the past. No matter how hard you try, you'll always be the homeless girl to people." The words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in months, Emma felt the walls of doubt closing in. She had been working so hard, doing everything she could to build a new life, but was it really enough? Could she ever escape the label the world had given her? Was she destined to be nothing more than a symbol of someone else's story? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Karen. "Hey, Emma, I know it's been a while since we last spoke, but I wanted to check in. How are you doing? We've got some new opportunities coming your way if you're interested. Let me know if you need anything." Emma stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keyboard as she considered how to respond. She knew Karen was just trying to help, but what did she really need right now? A new opportunity? Or the chance to find herself outside of the expectations everyone else had for her? The tension was thick, and Emma felt like she was caught between two worlds. The one where she was making progress, carving out a future she could be proud of, and the one where she was still haunted by her past. Every step forward seemed to come with a reminder that no matter how far she moved from the streets, she could never escape the memories. Later that day, she sat with a small group of friends from work, sharing a meal after her shift. They were talking about their dreams, their goals for the future. It was a normal conversation, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider. They all had plans, things they were working toward, and while Emma had her own plans, they still felt fragile. The foundation she had built for herself was still new, still unfinished, and that made her feel insecure. She wasn't like them. As the conversation continued, Emma noticed one of her coworkers, Rachel, watching her carefully. Rachel had been one of the few people who had really supported Emma through the roughest patches. She had encouraged Emma to stay positive, to keep moving forward. "Hey, Emma," Rachel said softly after a long pause. "I know things have been hard, and I get that it's easy to feel like you're not where you want to be. But trust me, you're doing better than anyone could have expected. You're not the same person you were when I first met you. You're strong." Emma didn't know how to respond. Rachel's words should have made her feel better, but instead, they felt like a reminder of everything she was still struggling to overcome. She wanted to tell Rachel how she felt, to explain the overwhelming weight of the past that she couldn't shake, but she kept it to herself. The next few days were a blur of work, classes, and moments of quiet reflection. Emma had always believed that the past couldn't hold her back forever. But now, sitting in the middle of her new life, she was beginning to wonder if maybe it was more than just the past. It was her. Her choices, her decisions, her fears. One afternoon, Karen reached out again. This time, her message was more urgent. "I need you to come in for a meeting tomorrow. We've got a new opportunity for you. Something big. I know you're hesitant, but this could change everything for you. Please, think about it." Emma didn't know what to think. What was this new opportunity? Was it the same kind of help that had gotten her this far, or was it something else? Something that might push her even further into the world she had never really been prepared for? She knew she needed to make a decision, but at the same time, she feared it might be another turning point she wasn't ready for. The following day, Emma arrived at the meeting with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She entered a sleek office building, the polished floors gleaming under fluorescent lights. Karen was waiting for her in a conference room, looking as professional as ever. "Emma," Karen said with a warm smile, "I'm glad you could make it. I know things have been hard, but we've been working on something that could really launch your career." Emma listened intently as Karen explained. The opportunity was a paid internship with a major nonprofit organization that worked with people transitioning from homelessness into stable housing and employment. The position wasn't glamorous, but it was a chance to help others, and, more importantly, to give Emma the platform to use her story to inspire those who were still struggling. It sounded perfect. It was exactly the kind of work Emma had dreamed of, the kind that aligned with her passion to help people who had been in her shoes. But the idea of stepping back into the spotlight, the pressure, the media attention, filled her with dread. Was she ready for this? Was this the right step? "I need some time to think about it," Emma said, her voice shaky. "This is a big decision." Karen nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. Just know that this could be your chance to really make an impact." As Emma left the building, the weight of her decision loomed over her. She had come so far, but the road ahead was full of uncertainty. Would this be her chance to truly make a difference? Or was she just setting herself up for another fall? The internal battle raged on as Emma continued to walk through the city, lost in thought. It wasn't just about the opportunity, it was about what came next. And the hardest part? Figuring out if she was ready to let go of the past for good. Days passed in a blur of uncertainty, and Emma found herself stuck in a cycle of doubt. She went to work, she attended her classes, but her mind was always elsewhere, tangled in the decision that loomed over her. Should she take the internship with the nonprofit and move forward, or stay in her comfort zone and continue to carve out the life she had already built? She'd been asking herself these questions constantly, each answer feeling both right and wrong at the same time. She wasn't sure she was ready for the responsibilities that came with the internship, and yet, she couldn't ignore the pull toward it. The chance to make a real difference in people's lives, to turn her past into something meaningful. It was an opportunity too good to pass up. Emma spent an entire afternoon pacing around her small apartment, trying to sort through the emotions she couldn't shake. She still had memories of those cold nights on the street, of feeling invisible, and of watching people who had everything while she had nothing. What if, by taking this opportunity, she could help others who were just like her? What if she could finally take control of her narrative, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt forgotten? But there was another side of her that feared this could end just like everything else. What if she failed? What if she wasn't good enough for this new path? What if the world just saw her as that girl from the interview, the homeless girl saved by Trump, instead of the woman she was trying to become? The struggle inside her was fierce. But then, one evening, as she sat on her bed with the phone in her hand, ready to send Karen a message with her decision, there was a knock on the door. She didn't expect anyone, so when she opened it, she was surprised to see Rachel standing there. "Hey," Rachel said, smiling as she stepped inside. "Can we talk?" Emma closed the door behind her and led Rachel to the couch. Rachel had always been there for her, and in this moment, Emma was grateful for her presence. She needed someone to help her see clearly, someone who knew what she had been through. "What's going on?" Rachel asked, sitting down next to Emma. "You've seemed off lately." Emma sighed, leaning back. "I've got this opportunity," she began, her voice hesitant. "It's with a nonprofit that helps people transition out of homelessness, and they want me to be part of it. But I don't know. I'm scared, Rachel. What if I'm not cut out for it? What if I let everyone down?" Rachel listened carefully, her eyes soft with understanding. She didn't interrupt as Emma poured out her feelings of fear and uncertainty. Finally, after a long pause, Rachel spoke. "Emma, look at where you are now. You're not the same person you were when I met you. I've seen you work so hard to get here. You're strong. You've got the drive, the heart, and the experience to help people. You're not just some girl who got lucky with a handout. You're someone who has fought for everything you have." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until now. For so long, she'd been doubting herself, questioning whether she was truly worthy of her success. But Rachel was right. She had fought, and she was still fighting. "You're ready for this," Rachel continued. "I know it's scary, but it's also a chance to step into something bigger than yourself. You've always wanted to make a difference, and this is how you do it. Not by staying in your comfort zone, but by taking the leap, even when it feels impossible." Emma wiped her eyes, surprised by the tears that had come without warning. She hadn't expected to break down in front of Rachel, but something in her words, something in the belief Rachel had in her, opened the floodgates. "I don't know if I can do it," Emma whispered. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not strong enough?" "Then you get back up and try again," Rachel said gently. "That's what you've always done. You've got this, Emma. And no matter what happens, you'll be okay. You're not alone." For the first time in days, Emma felt a shift inside her. The weight of her decision didn't seem so heavy anymore. Rachel's words echoed in her mind, and she realized that fear didn't have to hold her back. In fact, it was a part of the process, the challenge that made success all the more meaningful. The next morning, Emma woke up early and reached for her phone. She had spent the night thinking, talking to Rachel, and finally, she had made up her mind. She typed out the message to Karen, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm in. Let's do this." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, and a sense of relief washed over her. She had made her choice. No more doubting, no more hesitation. This was the next step in her journey. Later that afternoon, Emma met with Karen at the nonprofit's office. It wasn't glamorous, but there was a sense of purpose in the air. The staff was kind and welcoming, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Karen introduced her to the team, and Emma quickly realized that this wasn't just about her story. It was about what she could give back. She wasn't a before and after figure. She was a person with a voice, with a story that could make a real difference in the lives of others who had been where she once was. In the weeks that followed, Emma threw herself into her work. She connected with people who had been homeless, who were struggling, and she shared her journey with them, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that things could get better. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just someone who understood. And that made all the difference. The media attention still lingered, but it began to feel less intrusive. Emma was no longer the Trump girl or the homeless girl who made it big. She was Emma, someone who was working every day to help others find their way out of the darkness. As she sat in a small community meeting one evening, listening to someone share their struggles, Emma felt a quiet satisfaction. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a part of something bigger than herself, a movement to help those who had been forgotten. And for the first time, Emma realized that no matter how rocky the road had been, it had all led her here, to this moment. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was using it to build a future, and in doing so, she was helping others do the same. This was just the beginning, and she was ready. Weeks passed, and Emma settled into her new role at the nonprofit. What started as a leap of faith slowly transformed into a steady rhythm of work, passion, and connection. She spent her days meeting people who had once been where she had been, struggling to survive, feeling invisible, disconnected from the world around them. And, slowly, the walls she'd built around herself began to crumble. There was something about helping others, about being part of a larger mission, that made Emma feel like she was exactly where she was meant to be. It was different from the fame and attention she had received after her story went viral. This felt real, authentic. Every time she met someone new, shared a story, or offered a hand, Emma felt like she was living out her purpose. But, as the days turned into months, Emma began to notice something she hadn't expected. Despite her passion for helping others, there was a deep sadness she couldn't shake. It wasn't that she was unhappy with her new life. It was that, beneath the surface, she felt like something was still missing. She thought about the nights she'd spent lying awake in her small apartment, feeling a loneliness that no amount of work or service seemed to ease. She had purpose now. She had a career she was proud of. But there were moments, quiet, still moments, when the weight of everything that had happened still crept in. The past, the shame, the feeling of never truly fitting in. It was all still there, lurking, even in her newfound life. One evening, after a long day at work, Emma was sitting on the rooftop of her building, watching the city skyline stretch out before her. It was peaceful, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She pulled out her phone and checked social media, as she often did. This time, a message stood out, an invitation from a friend from her past. The message was from Lily, a woman Emma had met during her time on the streets. Lily was someone who had always been a source of strength for Emma, and though they had lost touch over the years, Emma had always considered her a friend. "Hey Emma, I know things have been crazy for you, but I wanted to reach out. I'm in town and I'd love to catch up. Let me know if you're free sometime." Emma hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the reply button. She hadn't seen Lily in over a year, and while they had been close back then, Emma wasn't sure if it was a good idea to reopen that door. She had worked so hard to distance herself from the past, to build a life she was proud of. But there was a part of her that missed Lily's raw, unfiltered presence. The kind of friendship that didn't need explanations, where you both understood each other without words. She decided to reply. "I'd love to see you, Lily. It's been too long. Let's meet up soon." A few days later, Emma and Lily met at a small cafe in the heart of the city. As soon as Lily walked in, Emma was struck by how much she hadn't changed. She still had that same fierce energy, that same ability to light up a room. They hugged, and for a brief moment, Emma felt like she was transported back in time to when things were simpler, before all the attention, before the pressure of being someone's story. They sat down at a small table near the window, and as they caught up, Emma felt a flood of emotions she hadn't expected. Lily asked about the nonprofit, about Emma's journey, and Emma found herself opening up more than she had in a long time. She shared everything, the highs, the lows, the doubts, and the victories. Lily listened intently, nodding along as Emma spoke. Finally, after a long pause, she said, "You know, Em, you've come a long way, but I can tell something's still bothering you. You've got all this success, but it's like you're carrying something heavy inside you. What's really going on?" Emma paused, not sure how to respond. She had never been one to show weakness, to admit that things weren't as perfect as they appeared on the surface. But something in Lily's eyes made her feel safe, like she didn't have to hide. "I don't know, Lily. I feel like I'm always trying to outrun my past. I've built this new life, but it feels like I'm still not free from the girl I used to be. And no matter how much I help others, I can't seem to help myself." Lily leaned forward, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're not running from your past, Emma. You're just carrying it with you. And that's okay. It's part of who you are. But you've got to stop trying to be perfect. You're allowed to feel all of it, the pain, the struggle, the triumph. All of it is part of the person you've become. You're not a superhero. You're human." Emma felt her throat tighten, the tears threatening to spill over. But I don't want to be the homeless girl anymore. I don't want people to see me that way. I've worked so hard to be more than that. Lily reached across the table and took Emma's hand, her grip firm. You are more than that. But you don't have to erase your past to prove it. The past is part of you, but it doesn't define you. You get to define who you are now. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of peace settle inside her. She didn't have to pretend she was perfect. She didn't have to hide the parts of her story that still haunted her. She could be all of it, her past, her present, and her future. And in that moment, she realized something important. It wasn't about escaping the label of being the homeless girl. It was about embracing all the parts of herself and knowing that she was enough, just as she was. As Emma walked back to her apartment that night, the city lights flickering around her, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known in years. The journey wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about accepting who she had always been, and knowing that, with every step, she was already enough. The road ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, Emma felt ready to walk it. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She was on her own path, and that was all that mattered. And with that, Emma knew she was ready to move forward, not to escape her past, but to build on it, step by step. As Emma continued to settle into her role at the nonprofit, something started to shift, not just within herself, but in the way she viewed the world around her. The more she interacted with people who were struggling, the more she realized how interconnected their stories were, how each person's past could ripple into their future in unexpected ways. It wasn't just about survival. It was about breaking free from the cycles that had trapped them for so long. One day, as she was preparing for a community outreach event, Emma received a call from Karen. She hadn't heard from her in a while, and she answered the phone with a smile. Hey Karen, what's up? Emma, I've been thinking a lot about your work here, Karen said, her voice filled with excitement. We've got an opportunity to expand. There's a new initiative that's being developed, and I think you're the perfect person to lead it. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had always admired Karen's vision, but the idea of leading an initiative was daunting. Her mind instantly went into overdrive. Could I really do this? Karen, sensing Emma's hesitation, continued, I know it's a big responsibility, but I also know you have the heart and the experience. You've been through things that give you a unique perspective. You have the ability to connect with people who feel invisible, who feel lost. And that's what this new initiative is all about, creating a space where people can heal, rebuild, and ultimately thrive. Emma's mind raced as she processed what Karen was saying. The responsibility felt heavy, but the possibility of making an even bigger impact was undeniable. She had spent so long feeling powerless, just trying to survive. Now, here she was, on the verge of leading a program that could change lives. Could she really do this? I don't know, Karen, Emma said, her voice quieter now. I'm still figuring out who I am in all of this. I'm not sure I'm ready to take on something so big. You are more ready than you think, Emma. You've been preparing for this your whole life, even if you didn't realize it. Think about how far you've come. You're already helping people. Imagine how much more you could do with the right support, the right platform. Karen's words hit Emma deeply. It was true. She had been building the skills, the mindset, and the confidence to take this step. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader in the making. The only thing holding her back was the fear that she wasn't enough. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of that fear. I'll do it, Emma said, her voice steady. I'll lead the initiative. A wave of relief and excitement washed over her as she hung up the phone. It felt like a turning point, a moment when everything she had worked for suddenly became real. She wasn't just part of the solution. She was going to help shape it. The weight of the responsibility still lingered, but it felt like something she could shoulder. Over the next few weeks, Emma dove headfirst into the planning and development of the new initiative. She spent hours meeting with experts, talking to clients, and getting feedback from people who had experienced homelessness firsthand. As she learned more about what people truly needed to heal and rebuild their lives, her vision for the program began to take shape. It wasn't about handing out resources or offering temporary solutions. It was about creating a foundation for people to stand on, helping them develop the skills, the confidence, and the support they needed to thrive long-term. Emma poured her heart and soul into every detail, but it wasn't just her vision. It was the collective effort of everyone at the nonprofit who shared her passion for making a difference. She leaned on her colleagues, learning from them, and in turn, teaching them about the experiences she had gone through. It became clear to her that true change wasn't something you could force or dictate. It had to come from a place of empathy, understanding, and collaboration. As the initiative began to take shape, Emma's role as its leader grew more defined. She found herself speaking at community events, meeting with donors, and building relationships with local organizations. It was overwhelming at times, but she found a sense of purpose in it that she had never experienced before. For the first time, she wasn't just telling her story. She was using it to create real, lasting change. But the true test of the initiative came when it was time to launch the program. The day of the first official event, Emma stood in front of a room full of people, clients, volunteers, partners, waiting for her to speak. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. She wasn't the homeless girl who was saved. She wasn't just the girl who had gotten a second chance. She was a woman who had worked tirelessly to create something that could change lives, and today, she was about to take the first step in sharing it with the world. Emma took a deep breath, walking up to the microphone. The room fell silent. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "My name is Emma, and I am honored to be here today. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like you're trapped in a cycle that you can't escape. I know what it's like to look at the world and wonder if there's any place for you in it." She paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of the people who were there for the same reason she was. Because they wanted change, because they believed in something better. "But I also know that change is possible. I'm here today because I believe in the power of community. I believe in the power of transformation. And I believe that no matter where you come from, or what you've been through, you deserve a future that is full of hope and opportunity. This initiative is not just about helping you survive, it's about giving you the tools to thrive." The room erupted into applause, and Emma felt a lump in her throat. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As the program continued to grow and evolve, Emma saw firsthand how the ripple effect of their work was transforming lives. People were finding jobs, rebuilding relationships, and discovering their own potential. It was hard, sometimes heartbreaking work, but it was worth it. The real change wasn't in the buildings they worked in or the programs they offered. It was in the hearts of the people they served. Emma realized that every step she had taken in her own journey, every hardship, every triumph, had led her to this moment. She wasn't just helping people get back on their feet. She was helping them rediscover their worth, their power, and their ability to create a future for themselves. She wasn't alone in this journey anymore. She was part of a larger movement, a collective effort to break the cycle of homelessness and give people the chance to rewrite their own stories. And in that, Emma found her purpose, no longer defined by her past, but empowered by the work she was doing to create a future for others. The ripple had started, and it was only growing stronger. Emma's days were a whirlwind of meetings, outreach programs, and new opportunities. The nonprofit initiative was thriving, but amidst all the success, Emma knew she couldn't continue running from her past forever. The weight of everything she had been through, the trauma, the pain, the feelings of being discarded, was still with her, even if she built a new life. Every time she spoke about overcoming hardship, she felt the deep knot in her stomach that told her there were unresolved issues she hadn't yet faced. One rainy evening, as Emma was finishing up a long day at the office, she sat at her desk, staring out the window. The lights of the city blurred by the rain gave the world an ethereal, distant quality, but Emma's mind was clouded. She realized something. No matter how much she'd achieved, no matter how much she helped others, there was a part of her that still felt broken. She couldn't help anyone if she wasn't willing to help herself. That's when she decided it was time to confront her past. The following day, Emma drove to the old neighborhood, the one she had fled all those years ago, the place that had once been home, a place she hadn't set foot in since the day she left. The streets hadn't changed much. The same corner stores, the same worn-down buildings, the same feeling of neglect lingered in the air. It was like a time capsule, preserving everything about her past, everything she had tried to escape. Her heart raced as she parked her car and stepped out onto the pavement. The familiar sounds and smells of the neighborhood hit her instantly, and for a moment, she felt overwhelmed by memories she thought she had buried long ago. But she didn't turn back. She was here for a reason. Walking down the familiar street, she approached the building where she had spent most of her childhood, the one she had left behind when she couldn't take it anymore. She stopped in front of it, standing still for a moment, taking in the sight. It looked just as she remembered it, though there were signs of wear and decay. But it was hers, in a way no other place could be. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The building was old, its walls cracked and stained. The once bright paint faded to an uneven gray. The smell of must and mildew hung in the air, and the flicker of fluorescent lights made it feel like a ghost town. Emma walked through the halls, each step echoing in the silence. She passed by the old apartments, some of which were empty, others that had clearly been abandoned. She didn't know what she was searching for: answers, closure, maybe even forgiveness. But as she moved deeper into the building, she found herself outside a door she hadn't seen in years. The door was still there, its wooden frame warped, the number 12 barely visible. Emma knocked softly, her heart thudding in her chest. It took a moment before the door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, older now, with streaks of gray in her once dark hair. Her eyes were tired but familiar, a reflection of the same pain Emma had carried for years. Her mother. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma's heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest. Her mother had never been the warm, nurturing figure Emma had wanted. She had been broken, just like Emma, and the years of addiction and neglect had driven a wedge between them. But now, standing before her, Emma saw something different. A woman who had, in her own way, struggled to survive in a world that had left her behind. "Mom," Emma whispered, the word unfamiliar on her tongue. Her mother's eyes softened, and after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "Emma, you came back?" Emma nodded, fighting the lump in her throat. "I've been trying to move forward, to do something good, but I realize I never really let go of everything. Of you. Of this place." Her mother's face twisted with a mix of sorrow and regret. "I'm sorry, Emma. I've always been sorry. I couldn't give you what you needed. I couldn't protect you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she didn't look away. "It wasn't your fault. You were lost, just like me. I had to leave to survive." The words felt like a release, as if something heavy inside her was finally being lifted. She didn't need her mother's apology. She didn't need her to fix everything. What she needed was to acknowledge the pain they had both experienced, to realize that they were both survivors. "Are you okay?" her mother asked softly. Emma looked at her mother, seeing her for the first time in years, not as a disappointment, but as a fellow human being. "I am. I've made peace with who I am. And I've made peace with the fact that we can't change the past, but we can change the future." Her mother nodded, as if the weight of Emma's words had finally registered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm glad to see you found a way to live." "I've found a way to forgive myself," Emma said quietly, the words surprising her. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just helping others find peace. She had found it for herself. They stood there in silence for a few more moments, the years of hurt and disappointment hanging in the air. Emma knew this conversation wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. A start to healing the wounds of the past, one step at a time. When Emma left her mother's apartment, it was like she was walking into a new chapter of her life. She was no longer running from the past. She had faced it head-on and realized that it didn't define her anymore. Her future wasn't tethered to the girl who had struggled on the streets. It was tied to the woman she had become. Someone who could help others find their way, someone who had the courage to heal herself, and someone who was finally ready to live fully in the present. As she drove away from the neighborhood, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of her past wasn't gone, but it no longer held power over her. She had broken the cycle, not by escaping it, but by acknowledging it, forgiving herself, and moving forward with a sense of purpose that was rooted in self-acceptance. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Emma felt like she was walking it with strength, clarity, and the peace she had long been searching for. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to embrace it. It had been weeks since Emma had confronted her past, but the emotional toll still lingered. She had learned to live with it, but there was a lingering feeling that her journey was far from over. Every step she took in her new life felt monumental, but there were still moments of uncertainty. Could she really continue to make a difference? Was she capable of handling everything that came with leading the nonprofit initiative? As if the universe had answered her unspoken doubts, one morning Emma received an unexpected phone call. "Hello, Emma. This is Jonathan Reed," the voice on the other end said. "I'm with the local council, and I've been following your work with the nonprofit. I wanted to meet with you and discuss some potential partnership opportunities." Emma sat up straighter in her chair, surprised by the call. Jonathan Reed was a well-known local philanthropist, a businessman turned politician with deep ties to the community. He was someone whose name was frequently mentioned at high-profile charity events and in the media. The idea of him wanting to meet with her, a former homeless girl turned nonprofit leader, was almost too surreal to process. "I would love to meet," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The meeting was set for the following afternoon, and Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. What did Jonathan Reed want from her? What could someone like him possibly see in someone like her? When Emma arrived at the upscale coffee shop where they were to meet, she immediately noticed the contrast between their worlds. The polished interior, the aroma of expensive coffee beans, the soft hum of conversation. It all felt foreign to her, a far cry from the gritty, worn-out streets where she had once struggled to survive. As she walked toward the back corner of the cafe, she saw Jonathan Reed already sitting at a table, his back straight, his sharp suit impeccable. He looked every bit the part of a successful, influential businessman. "Miss Foster, it's a pleasure," Jonathan said, standing to greet her. His smile was warm but calculated, like someone used to making connections for business. They shook hands, and Emma felt an immediate tension in the air. It wasn't unfriendly, but it was formal, almost too formal. "Thank you for reaching out to me," Emma said, taking a seat. She was still processing the surreal nature of the meeting, but she wasn't going to let nerves get the best of her. "I'm curious to hear what you have in mind." Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting from businesslike to more personal. "I've been watching your nonprofit closely. The work you're doing is impressive, more than just handing out resources. You're giving people hope, and that's something we need more of in this city." Emma nodded. She had always known that what they were doing at the nonprofit was more than just charity. It was about dignity, about offering people a chance to rebuild their lives on their own terms. But hearing it from someone like Jonathan made her realize just how much potential the organization had to make a significant impact. "I've always believed that the way to truly make a difference is to give people the tools to help themselves," Emma said. "We're not just about survival. We're about empowerment." "That's exactly why I wanted to meet," Jonathan said, his eyes lighting up with interest. "I believe we can take that mission even further. I'm in a position to offer resources, connections, and some political support. There's an upcoming bill in the council that aims to increase funding for homeless programs, and I think your organization could be a major player in shaping its future." Emma's mind raced. Political support? A bill that could potentially bring in more funding? She had never imagined that her work would cross paths with local government in such a direct way. It was a game changer. "Are you suggesting that we partner with the city on this?" Emma asked cautiously. Jonathan nodded. "Exactly. But it's not just about the funding. It's about giving you a seat at the table when decisions are being made. You've lived this experience, Emma. You know what works and what doesn't. I believe your insight is invaluable." Emma felt a surge of emotion. It was one thing to be recognized for her work. It was another to be asked to help shape policies that could influence the lives of countless people. The opportunity to partner with someone as influential as Jonathan Reed could change everything for the nonprofit. But a voice inside her hesitated. Could she trust someone like Jonathan? He was wealthy, powerful, and had the ability to influence people at the highest levels. But Emma had seen too much to take everything at face value. Politicians and philanthropists often had their own agendas, their own interests to protect. Would Jonathan truly have the best intentions? Or was this just another deal? Another opportunity for someone to profit off the backs of people who had been forgotten. I appreciate the offer, Jonathan, Emma said, her voice steady but cautious. But I need to understand more. What's in it for you? What's your end goal here? Jonathan's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. I understand your concern, he said, leaning back in his chair. I'll be honest, Emma. I've seen firsthand how these issues affect the community. I've lost people I care about to addiction, to homelessness, and I want to do more than just write a check. I want to be part of a lasting solution. I'm willing to put my resources and influence behind something that actually works. Emma listened closely, trying to gauge the sincerity in his words. There was a part of her that still felt cautious, but there was also something else, something that told her this could be an opportunity to expand their impact in ways they hadn't imagined. Let's move forward with this, Emma said finally, her decision made. But I want transparency, and I want to ensure that we're always putting the needs of the people we serve first. If we're going to work together, it has to be a partnership, not a transaction. Jonathan smiled, nodding in agreement. You have my word. As they continued to talk about the specifics of the potential partnership, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was a chance to build bridges between the world she had left behind and the world she was now part of, between the people who had struggled and those who had the power to help. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but Emma was no longer afraid. She had faced her past, and now she was ready to take on the future. With Jonathan's support, Emma knew they could amplify the nonprofit's impact, reaching more people and creating a real, lasting difference. The road ahead wasn't guaranteed, but Emma was more determined than ever to walk it, knowing that no matter what, she had the power to shape her destiny and the destinies of others. As the weeks passed, Emma's partnership with Jonathan Reed began to take shape. The initial excitement of securing political support and funding for the nonprofit gave her a sense of accomplishment, but it also came with a sharp edge. The more involved she became in the political discussions surrounding the homeless initiative, the more she began to see the world through Jonathan's eyes, a world of influence, power, and often hidden agendas. It wasn't long before Emma found herself in uncharted waters. Meetings with city council members, private dinners with influential business leaders, and fundraising galas where she rubbed shoulders with the city's elite. All of this was a far cry from the small community-based efforts she had started with. At first, she felt out of place, like an imposter in a world that didn't belong to people like her. But she had learned to navigate difficult situations before. She reminded herself that the bigger picture, helping the homeless, making a real change, was worth the discomfort. The power to create real change was within her grasp, and she wasn't going to let it slip away because of her doubts. One evening, after a particularly exhausting meeting with a group of wealthy donors, Emma sat down with Jonathan in his office. The city skyline stretched out before them, a sprawling sea of lights that seemed to represent everything Jonathan had achieved: success, wealth, and influence. He was relaxed, leaning back in his chair, an air of confidence around him. Emma, I have to say, you've done incredible work. This project is really picking up steam. The funding is coming through, and we're making strides with the council, Jonathan said, his tone full of approval. I think it's time we start thinking bigger. National exposure. Media. People need to see what we're doing here. Emma listened quietly, her fingers lightly tapping on the edge of her glass. The thought of national exposure wasn't unappealing. The idea of raising awareness and getting more attention for the cause was tempting. But there was something about Jonathan's tone, something she couldn't quite place, that made her uneasy. It was too polished, too rehearsed. National exposure sounds great, Emma said cautiously, but I don't want to lose sight of the people we're trying to help. We've seen what happens when initiatives get too big, too fast. Sometimes the people who need it most get left behind in the shuffle. Jonathan's expression shifted, just for a moment. His eyes darkened slightly, but he quickly masked it with a smile. I understand your concern, Emma, but you need to think bigger. This is how change happens, at scale. The more people we can reach, the more resources we can get. You don't want to be stuck in a small, local bubble forever, do you? Emma's mind raced. Jonathan was right about one thing. If they wanted to make a lasting impact, they needed to grow. But something didn't sit right with the idea of scaling up so quickly, especially when it meant being tied to powerful people who might not always have the best interests of the community at heart. "I'm not saying we shouldn't grow," Emma said slowly, "but I want to ensure that our core values don't get compromised. We're not a business, Jonathan. We're a community, and we have to keep that focus on the people who need us the most." Jonathan's smile tightened, and for a brief moment, Emma saw the power struggle beneath the surface. "Emma, I've been in this game long enough to know that values alone won't keep an organization alive. We need strategy. We need reach. The people you want to help won't benefit if we don't have the resources to make a difference." It was a sentiment she had heard before from others in his position. They believed that power and resources were the key to solving problems, not the hearts of the people who were directly affected. Emma's stomach twisted, but she didn't back down. "I agree that we need resources," Emma replied, meeting his gaze. "But we also need integrity. If we lose sight of why we're doing this, we've failed before we've even started." The tension between them hung thick in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Emma could feel the weight of the decision she was facing. The line between idealism and pragmatism had never seemed so blurry. Jonathan finally broke the silence. "I respect your passion, Emma, but you have to understand, the higher we go, the more compromises we'll have to make. You can't play in the big leagues without some sacrifices. Are you ready for that?" Emma's heart raced. She had worked so hard to build something meaningful. But was it possible to build something that could last on her terms without losing herself in the process? "Let's take it one step at a time," Emma said, standing up and gathering her things. "I'm not ready to make those kinds of compromises yet, but I appreciate your honesty, Jonathan." As Emma left Jonathan's office that night, she felt conflicted. She had wanted this partnership, this opportunity to make a real difference, but the more time she spent in the political and philanthropic world, the more she realized that the cost of power might be higher than she was willing to pay. There was no doubt in her mind that they could make a huge impact if she chose to play the game the way Jonathan and others like him did. But at what cost? That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about the people she had met along the way, the ones who had truly inspired her to keep going. The faces of the homeless families she had helped, the young woman who had found a job through the program, the elderly man who had regained his dignity through a simple act of kindness. These were the people she was fighting for. Not the powerful, not the elites. They were the heart of the cause, and she couldn't afford to lose sight of that. The next morning, Emma woke up determined. She wasn't going to let the world of politics and business change her. She would play by her own rules, even if it meant sacrificing some of the growth she had dreamed of. After all, she had already learned one important lesson from her past. No amount of success or power was worth losing yourself. Emma called a meeting with her team later that afternoon, determined to discuss a new strategy, one that stayed true to their values while still ensuring they could expand and make a real difference in the lives of those who needed it the most. She knew there would be challenges ahead, and she would have to make tough decisions. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to compromise who she was or the people she was trying to help for the sake of power or influence. Emma had come too far to lose herself now, and as she looked around the room at the people who believed in her, she realized that her real strength wasn't in the resources or connections she had gained. It was in the unwavering commitment to the mission she had started with, to lift people up, to empower them, and to never lose sight of the human element behind every decision. The future might be uncertain, but with her values intact, Emma was ready to face whatever came next. Emma's resolve to stay true to her mission was tested sooner than she expected. The nonprofit's partnership with Jonathan Reed had already started to attract attention, but the true weight of the situation hit when the media storm began. One morning, as Emma sipped her coffee in the small office that had become her sanctuary, her phone buzzed incessantly. A flood of notifications lit up the screen, each more alarming than the last. At first, she dismissed it as another trivial news cycle. But then, one headline caught her eye. Nonprofit's new partnership with politician Jonathan Reed. A game changer or a political power play? The article was from one of the city's largest news outlets, and the accompanying photo was a shot of Emma and Jonathan at a recent fundraising event. They were laughing together, seemingly the perfect power couple in the nonprofit world. But the tone of the article was anything but flattering. Some questioned the motivations behind the partnership, suggesting that Jonathan's involvement was more about political gain than genuine desire to help the homeless. Others speculated that Emma was just a pawn in a larger game to further Jonathan's agenda. The public scrutiny was immediate, and it was relentless. Emma's social media accounts exploded with comments, some supportive, others critical, but the overwhelming message was clear. The public was divided. That afternoon, Emma had a meeting scheduled with her board members. She knew they'd already seen the media coverage, and there was no escaping the tension in the air when she walked into the room. "You've seen the articles," Jonathan said, his voice calm but with an edge of concern. "I knew this was going to happen. The media likes to stir up controversy, but it's nothing we can't handle." Emma sat down, feeling the weight of his words. "Jonathan, I don't know if I'm ready for this kind of attention. I never signed up for a media circus. We've always focused on the people we serve, not the headlines." One of her board members, Claire, leaned forward. "Emma, you can't ignore the media. This could either make or break us. If we don't control the narrative, someone else will. We need to be proactive, leverage the exposure, turn it into something positive." "I agree with Claire," Jonathan chimed in. "The attention is already here. We have to use it to our advantage. You've worked hard to get us this far. Let's keep the momentum going." Emma paused, her mind racing. She understood their point. The exposure could open doors that were once closed, but it also came with a risk. She had always preferred to work behind the scenes, quietly helping people without the glare of the spotlight. But now, it seemed, the spotlight had found her, and it wasn't going away. She felt a lump form in her throat. But what if it all becomes too much? What if it starts to compromise everything we've worked for? "Emma, you can't let fear dictate your decisions," Jonathan replied, his voice more forceful than usual. "This is your chance to take everything you've built to the next level. You've earned the right to be seen. Don't shy away from it." Emma took a deep breath. She had always known that leadership required sacrifice, but she hadn't anticipated how much of herself she would have to give up to make her vision a reality. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this moment was pivotal. She could either retreat into the shadows, preserving her sense of self but limiting the potential of the nonprofit, or she could step into the light and embrace the scrutiny, hoping to use it as a platform for greater change. The following days were a whirlwind. Emma found herself on television interviews, speaking at press conferences, and attending even more high-profile meetings with politicians, philanthropists, and media personalities. While she had become accustomed to public speaking through her work with the nonprofit, this level of attention was entirely different. The questions from the media were pointed, often probing into her relationship with Jonathan Reed, her organization's funding, and whether she was truly in control of the direction they were headed. Everywhere she went, cameras followed, and her every word was scrutinized. There was little room for missteps. One evening, after a particularly grueling interview, Emma sat alone in her office, staring at the reflection of herself in the darkened window. The woman she saw didn't feel like the same person who had started this journey all those years ago. She had changed. Part of her felt empowered by the visibility, but part of her felt like she was losing touch with the very people she was trying to help. Her phone buzzed, a message from Claire. "We need you at the gala tomorrow. It's important for the brand. The sponsors are expecting you to show up with Jonathan." Emma let out a long breath. The pressure was mounting. She had always believed that actions spoke louder than words, but now, it felt as though her every action, every appearance, would be dissected by the public. Was this the price of power? Was this the path she had to walk if she wanted to make a real difference? The night before the gala, Emma met with her closest confidant, Lily, who had been with her through the toughest of times. Lily was a grounded presence, the kind of person who had seen Emma at her worst and still believed in her vision. "Emma, what's really bothering you?" Lily asked, sitting across from her. "I know you, and I can tell something's off." Emma hesitated, not knowing how to express the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. "I'm starting to feel like I'm losing myself in all of this. I'm doing interviews, I'm making deals, I'm being paraded around like some kind of success story, but it doesn't feel real anymore." Lily reached across the table, taking Emma's hand in hers. "You're still the same person who fought for this cause. You haven't changed, but the world around you is changing. You don't have to let that change who you are. It's easy to get lost in all the noise, but don't forget why you started this. Emma nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm afraid, Lily. What if I become just another politician in disguise? What if, in the end, I'm no different than the people I've fought against? Lily squeezed her hand. Emma, you're not alone. You never have been. You've built something real, something that matters. If anyone can navigate this, it's you. Just remember who you are and what you stand for. Emma took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The next day, at the gala, as the spotlight hit her again, she made a decision. She would use this platform, not for personal gain, not for political maneuvering, but for the people who needed her most. She wouldn't let the spotlight strip away her soul. She was here to stay true to her values, no matter the cost. It was time to redefine the narrative. Emma was no longer just a homeless girl who had begged for help. She was a force for change, a woman who would fight for the voiceless, even in the face of power, even when the world demanded she compromise. Emma wasn't going to lose herself in the fame. She would be the one to shape it. As the days turned into weeks, Emma's life continued to spiral into a whirlwind of public appearances, interviews, and high-powered meetings. The media scrutiny only intensified, with every move she made being analyzed and critiqued. Jonathan Reed, now a more visible part of her efforts, had begun to use their partnership to his advantage, making statements that hinted at his growing influence over her nonprofit. The press seemed to sense an inevitable shift, as if they were waiting for Emma to buckle under the pressure, or to reveal some hidden agenda behind her work. But she wasn't ready to let the media dictate her story. At the gala, the media swarmed around her like vultures, eager for soundbites and scandal. Every camera lens was trained on her, every question aimed at exposing some perceived flaw. But Emma had learned how to deflect, how to keep her focus on the people who needed her, despite the ever-present cameras and microphones. She smiled and answered questions about homelessness, about the nonprofit's mission, always redirecting the conversation to the human element. The people they were helping, the success stories that were coming out of their programs. It was her mantra, her shield against the growing realization that the deeper she got into the world of power and politics, the more she began to lose sight of her original purpose. Later that evening, after the last of the gala guests had left, Emma stood on the balcony of the luxurious venue, looking out at the city. The lights twinkled below like stars, each one representing a different story, a different struggle. She wondered if the people she was trying to help even knew who she was anymore. They probably didn't care about the media coverage, the lavish events. All they cared about was whether or not they'd have a place to sleep tonight, whether they'd get a warm meal or have the chance to start over. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder, and she turned to find Jonathan standing beside her. His expression was one of casual confidence, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. He had been her ally, her partner in this mission, but she was starting to question his true motives. "You did well tonight," Jonathan said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "The media loved the way you spoke about the cause. You've got them eating out of the palm of your hand." Emma didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked out over the city again, her mind racing. Was this really what she had signed up for? To be a face for a cause that had become more about political alliances and media attention than actual change? "Jonathan," she said quietly, her voice betraying the doubt that had been growing in her chest. "I need to ask you something. Are we doing this for the right reasons? Or are we just playing a game?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before returning with its usual charm. "What do you mean, Emma? We're making real progress here. You're getting more attention than any nonprofit leader could dream of. This is how change happens, through influence, through power." Emma took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always believed in the power of grassroots movements, of making real connections with people who were affected by the issues she cared about. But now, it seemed like everything had been reduced to strategy, to optics. She wasn't sure she knew who she was anymore. "I'm not sure I want to be part of this game," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I wanted to help people. I wanted to be there for the ones who don't have a voice. But now it feels like we're using their struggles to further our own agenda, and I don't know if I can live with that." Jonathan's smile tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Emma, don't be naive. This is how things work. Power is the key to change. You can't help anyone if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the connections. If you walk away from this now, you'll be throwing away everything you've worked for. Think about the impact we could have together, the lives we could change." Emma turned to face him fully, her gaze unwavering. "I don't know if I can change lives if I'm losing myself in the process. If this is the price of success, maybe it's too high." Jonathan's expression hardened, and for the first time, Emma saw a glimpse of something cold behind his eyes. "I think you're forgetting something, Emma. You can't afford to walk away. Not now. You've built something that's bigger than yourself. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about the future. And if you throw it all away, you'll be letting everyone down. Your supporters, your donors, the people who've invested in this cause." His words echoed in her mind as she walked away from the balcony, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Was Jonathan right? Was this really bigger than her? The pressure of the situation felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on her. She had come so far, and yet now, everything felt fragile. The following week, Emma received an invitation to a high-stakes meeting, a gathering of philanthropists and political figures who had the power to make or break her nonprofit. The invitation was clear. This was her chance to secure the future of the organization, to solidify her position in the world of influence. But at what cost? As she prepared for the meeting, Emma found herself torn. The message she had always believed in, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves, was slipping away. The lines between right and wrong had blurred. The choice before her was simple yet impossible. She could continue down this path, solidifying her place among the powerful, securing the future of her nonprofit, and bringing change to thousands of lives. Or she could walk away, preserve her values, and risk losing it all. The stakes had never been higher. That night, Emma sat in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back at her. She didn't know if she was ready for the consequences of either choice, but she knew one thing. The time had come to make a decision that would define not just the future of the nonprofit, but the kind of person she was going to be. Tomorrow, she would face the most difficult decision of her life. The day of the meeting arrived, and Emma found herself standing in front of the mirror in her small, modest apartment, adjusting her blazer for the umpteenth time. The reflection staring back at her was almost unrecognizable. A woman with a polished appearance, sharp lines of makeup on her face, and a look of determination that didn't match the turmoil brewing inside. The invitation to meet with the influential philanthropists and political figures had come the night after her conversation with Jonathan, and it had filled her with equal parts dread and anticipation. This was the opportunity she had worked so hard for, the kind of chance she couldn't afford to waste. But as much as she told herself that, a quiet voice in her head reminded her that the more power she gained, the further she was slipping from the person she had once been. She looked down at her phone one last time. A message from Lily flashed on the screen. "Remember why you started. You're more than just a face in a suit. Stay true to yourself." Emma smiled faintly at the words, but they didn't ease the anxiety gnawing at her. "Stay true to yourself," she muttered under her breath as she grabbed her coat and left the apartment. Easier said than done. The car ride to the venue felt long, almost surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold in front of her. She'd never imagined that the work she had started with such pure intentions would lead her to this crossroads. The luxurious ballroom where the meeting was being held was a far cry from the shelters she had worked in, the alleyways where she had once slept. Now, she was about to sit at the table with the very people whose interests often stood in direct opposition to the ones she had fought for. Emma arrived at the venue, a grand hotel downtown, its marble floors and gold chandeliers casting an air of opulence that made her feel even more out of place. She checked in at the front desk, her hands trembling slightly as she signed in. As she entered the main hall, her eyes scanned the room, landing on several familiar faces, high-profile philanthropists, business leaders, and a few well-known politicians. But in the center of it all stood Jonathan, surrounded by people eagerly hanging on his every word. He saw her and smiled, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who knew the game all too well. "Emma," Jonathan said, his voice carrying across the room as he stepped toward her. I'm glad you could make it. These are the people who can really help us take this cause to the next level. Everyone's excited about the future. Emma forced a smile, but inside, her heart was heavy. The future. It was all about the future now, wasn't it? The future of the nonprofit, the future of the people she served, and the future of her own career. But what kind of future was it? The kind that prioritized power and influence over everything else? As she walked into the room, she felt eyes on her, their gazes measuring her, calculating her worth in the world of high-stakes philanthropy. The conversation around her shifted as people noticed her entrance, and soon, she was surrounded by the very individuals she had once hoped to avoid, those who saw everything through a lens of transactions and power. One of the most prominent philanthropists, a man named Michael Donovan, a major donor to several political campaigns, stepped forward. He was in his mid-50s, his sharp suit betraying the years he had spent making money and making connections. "Emma, it's an honor to finally meet you in person," Michael said, extending his hand. "I've heard great things about your work. Your partnership with Jonathan Reed is truly a game-changer." Emma shook his hand, her mind racing. The words were hollow, rehearsed. She could tell he wasn't interested in the cause as much as he was in the opportunity. "Thank you, Michael," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "I'm sure you're aware of the incredible potential we have here," Michael continued, his tone smooth, calculated. "But Emma, it's not just about helping the homeless. It's about creating lasting change, real systemic change, and that means aligning with the right people." Emma swallowed hard. Aligning with the right people. That's what this had become, hadn't it? A dance of influence, of shaping narratives, of making the right connections. The cause she had dedicated her life to seemed to be slipping further and further away. "I understand," she replied quietly, her gaze flickering to Jonathan, who was now talking with a group of other influential figures. He caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod, a sign that everything was moving according to plan. The plan. But was it her plan? The evening continued with more conversations, more discussions about funding and influence, and Emma found herself growing more and more disconnected from the room. Every handshake, every compliment, felt like a hollow gesture, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit with the life she had envisioned. But Jonathan was right. She was in too deep now. There was no turning back, was there? As the meeting drew to a close, a sense of finality hung in the air. Emma had spoken about the work she was doing, had made the necessary connections, but something inside her still felt lost. She stood with Jonathan as they made their way out of the room, her mind still reeling from the decisions she had to make. The weight of the future, her future, the nonprofit's future, was almost unbearable. As they entered the elevator together, Jonathan turned to her with a satisfied smile. "You did well tonight, Emma. This is just the beginning. We're on the verge of something huge." Emma nodded, but she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her stomach. "Jonathan," she said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about the direction we're heading. The power, the influence. It's all so overwhelming. I need to know, what's your real goal here?" Jonathan's smile faltered slightly, but only for a moment. "You know why I'm here. We're building something great together. You wanted change. I can help you make that change happen on a scale you never dreamed of." Emma stared at him, the truth of his words sinking in. But was that all there was to it? Could she really accept that this was the kind of change that was worth making? Was this the future she had dreamed of? She had a choice. The future was hers to create, but it was also hers to lose. The elevator door slid open, and Emma stepped out into the cool night air. The choice that lay before her felt more monumental than ever before. The path ahead could lead to a kind of power she'd never imagined. But would it cost her everything she had ever believed in? Tomorrow would come with its own set of challenges, but today, she had to face one simple truth. Whatever choice she made, it would define who she was and who she would become. The night air felt colder than usual as Emma walked away from the hotel, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. The bright lights of the city illuminated the path ahead, but no amount of brightness could cut through the haze in her mind. She had never felt more uncertain, more lost in the whirlwind she had created. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same question. What kind of change did she want to create? As she climbed into the back of the car, The driver gave her a polite nod but said nothing. The silence in the vehicle was deafening, amplifying the sense of isolation Emma had been feeling for weeks. Jonathan's words echoed in her ears. "We're building something great together." The question was, though, what was being built? Was it a future that would truly help those she had sworn to serve? Or was it something far more self-serving, a political maneuver dressed in the guise of charity? As the car sped through the city streets, Emma found herself grappling with the very identity she had built over the years. The girl who had once advocated for the homeless, for the voiceless, for the invisible, had somehow gotten tangled in a world where influence, power, and money dictated everything. Was she still that girl? Or had she become something else entirely? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She fumbled to take it out, surprised to see a message from Lily. "Meet me tomorrow. You need to see this." See what? Emma wondered. The message was cryptic, and Lily had never been one to send such vague texts. Still, Emma couldn't help but feel a pull, a need to reach out to the one person who had been her anchor through all of this. Lily had been her friend before any of this fame or power had come into the picture, and maybe, just maybe, Lily could remind her who she was at her core. Without hesitation, Emma responded, "I'll be there." "Where?" Lily's response came almost instantly. "I'll send the address." 11 a.m. Don't be late. The next morning, Emma made her way to the address Lily had sent. It was a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street, far from the glamorous venues and power brokers she had grown accustomed to. The place smelled of freshly brewed coffee and pastries, and the sound of quiet conversations filled the air. It felt like a world away from the suffocating meetings, the glittering galas, and the manipulative politics. When Emma stepped inside, she saw Lily sitting at a table in the back corner, her eyes lighting up when she spotted Emma. She waved her over, and Emma couldn't help but smile, grateful for the familiarity. "Hey," Lily said, standing up to give Emma a quick hug. "You okay?" Emma sighed, sinking into the chair across from Lily. "I don't know. I'm really not sure anymore." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Talk to me." "I've been to more meetings in the last few weeks than I can count," Emma began, her voice heavy. "I've been rubbing elbows with people I never thought I'd be in the same room with. Politicians, billionaires, you name it. And it's not what I thought it would be. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Lily leaned in, her expression serious. "What do you mean? You've been doing incredible work. You're changing lives." "Am I?" Emma asked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "It doesn't feel that way. The more I get involved, the more it feels like I'm losing myself. It's all about power, influence, and money now. I'm not sure where the cause ends and the politics begin." Lily paused, considering her words carefully. "Look, I get it. You've been thrust into a world that's got its own rules, and it's easy to get swept up in it. But you've always been someone who fights for what's right. You've made a difference, Emma, but it's not just about the money or the media coverage. It's about the people. Remember them." Emma looked down at her hands, her heart heavy. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Lily. Every step I take in this world, I feel more disconnected from the people I started this for." Lily's gaze softened. "You've always been someone who believed in the power of human connection. Don't lose that just because things are getting bigger. The more people you meet, the more opportunities you have to make a real difference. But you have to stay true to who you are. You can't let the system change you." The words hit Emma like a wave, crashing through the walls she had built around her emotions. Stay true to who you are. She had started this journey with a clear purpose, to make the world better for those who had nothing. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred. She had become consumed by the very world she had hoped to change. "I don't know how to stay true to myself anymore," Emma admitted, her voice breaking. Lily reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you need to take a step back. You need to find that clarity again, or you'll lose yourself entirely. You don't need to compromise who you are to make change. The right kind of change will come when you stay grounded in your purpose." Emma wiped away a tear, not caring that it blurred her vision. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. She had been running for so long, trying to keep up with expectations, with the pressure to be a perfect leader, a perfect voice. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep going like this. The thought of stepping away from everything, the nonprofit, the influence, the high-profile meetings, was terrifying. She had come so far, built so much. Could she really walk away? Could she risk losing it all for the sake of staying true to herself? But as she sat there with Lily, the weight of the decision felt less like a burden and more like a chance for a new beginning. Maybe it was time to let go of the trappings of success and focus on what truly mattered. "I need to figure this out," Emma said, her voice steady now, a new sense of resolve growing within her. "I need to remember why I started this in the first place." Lily smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'll be here no matter what you decide. Just remember, you don't have to do this alone." As Emma left the cafe that morning, the fog in her mind began to lift. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could see a glimmer of light. The reckoning was here, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of something new, something that might change everything. Tomorrow, Emma would take the next step in her journey. What that step would be, she wasn't sure. But she knew one thing. It would be a step toward reclaiming her soul. The following days were a blur of introspection and contemplation. Emma had taken the time to step back from the whirlwind of meetings and gala events that had become her life. She spent hours reflecting on her past decisions and the path she had chosen, weighing the options in front of her. Her apartment, once a small sanctuary where she could retreat from the chaos, now felt cold and unfamiliar. The quiet felt louder than it had ever been, as if the silence was pressing in on her, demanding that she confront the reality of her situation. She had spent so much time building a future for others, but in doing so, she had forgotten to build a future for herself. Each morning, she woke up with the same questions hanging in the air. Can I still make a difference? Can I stay true to my values and succeed in this world? The more she tried to find an answer, the more she felt the weight of the expectations around her pulling her in different directions. Jonathan had reached out several times, but Emma had kept her distance. She couldn't bring herself to face him, not yet. She needed space to think, to breathe, and to determine her next move. She wasn't sure what that would be, but deep down, she knew one thing. Whatever path she chose, it had to be hers and hers alone. It was a Thursday afternoon when she finally decided to meet with Lily again. The air was thick with tension as Emma walked through the small park where they had agreed to meet. She spotted Lily sitting on a bench, her arms crossed, watching the world go by. She looked calm, but Emma could see the concern in her eyes as she approached. "Hey," Emma said, sitting down beside her. "How are you?" Lily shrugged, offering a small smile. "I'm doing okay, but you look like you've got a lot on your mind." Emma let out a long sigh, feeling the weight of the past week pressed down on her chest. "I don't know what to do anymore, Lily. Every time I think I've got it figured out, something changes. The people I'm working with, they don't care about the cause the way I do. It's all about politics, power, and money. I thought I could make a difference, but now I'm starting to wonder if I've just become part of the system I used to hate." Lily nodded slowly, her expression sympathetic. "I get it. It's hard to see the truth when you're so deep in it. But you've got to remember why you started this in the first place. You've always wanted to help people, not climb some ladder. And there's a way to do that without losing yourself." Emma's eyes welled up, but she blinked them back quickly. "I want to help people, I do. But I'm afraid of what happens if I step away. I've worked so hard to get to this point. What if I throw it all away?" Lily's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on Emma's. "You haven't lost anything. You're just reorienting. Sometimes the hardest thing is to walk away from something that seems like success in order to find the path that truly matters. It's scary, but you've got the strength to do it. I believe in you." The words hit Emma hard. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to push through the toughest challenges. But this was different. The kind of strength she needed now wasn't about pushing through. It was about choosing to stand still, to take a breath, and to decide who she wanted to be. "Do you think I've lost my way?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily didn't hesitate. "No, I think you're just figuring out who you are without all the noise. It's easy to lose sight of who you are when you're constantly surrounded by people telling you who you should be. But you're still you, Emma, and no one can take that away. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the calmness of Lily's words sink in. She needed this time to reconnect with herself, to remember the girl who had once slept on the streets, who had fought for every scrap of dignity in a world that didn't seem to care. That girl was still inside her, buried under layers of power suits, boardroom meetings, and the hollow promises of success. Maybe you're right, Emma said softly. Maybe I've been listening to the wrong voices for too long. That's the first step, Lily said with a smile. The rest will come when you're ready. The next day, Emma made the hardest decision she had ever faced. She called Jonathan. His voice was smooth and confident as always, but there was an undertone of impatience that Emma could hear, even through the phone. Emma, I've been trying to reach you, he said, his tone pleasant but sharp. I was hoping we could meet. There's a lot happening right now, and we need to make some moves. Emma paused for a long moment. She could feel the pressure in his words, the subtle demand for action. It was the kind of pressure she had come to expect from him, the kind that always pushed her forward, faster, harder. I can't meet with you right now, she said quietly. I need to step back from the nonprofit for a while. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Emma could almost hear Jonathan's mind working, calculating, trying to process her words. What do you mean? Step back? He finally asked, his voice controlled but tinged with disbelief. Emma, we're on the verge of something big. You can't just walk away now. I'm not walking away, she said firmly. I just need some time to figure out what I'm really doing here, what this is all for. There was another pause, longer this time. Then, Jonathan spoke, his voice cold and distant. You're making a mistake. You've come too far to turn back now. I don't think it's a mistake, Emma replied, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. I think it's the right choice. The conversation ended with a few polite words, but Emma knew this was it. She had made her choice, and as she set the phone down, she felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders, replaced by a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't sure what the future held. She didn't have all the answers. But one thing was clear. She had chosen to stand in her truth, to reclaim her purpose, and to stop letting the noise of the world drown out her own voice. And for the first time in weeks, Emma felt ready to face whatever came next. Tomorrow, she would begin again. And this time, she would do it on her terms. The days that followed Emma's conversation with Jonathan were quiet, but they were the kind of quiet she hadn't known in a long time. She woke up every morning with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. It was as though the weight of 1,000 expectations had been lifted, and for the first time, she was breathing without the pressure of living up to someone else's vision of success. Instead of rushing off to meetings or conferences, Emma spent her mornings walking the city streets, taking in the world around her. She stopped by local shelters, talking with the homeless individuals she had once fought so hard to help. Their stories, their struggles, and their laughter reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about headlines or politics. It was about real people and their real needs. Emma needed to reconnect with that core purpose. She needed to rediscover her heart. One afternoon, as she wandered through a neighborhood she hadn't visited in a while, Emma came across a small park where a group of children were playing. Their laughter rang out, clear and pure, and for a moment, she stood there, simply watching. They reminded her of the innocence she had lost somewhere along the way. The world had a way of pushing people to grow up too fast, to chase things that weren't always worth chasing. A woman sitting on a nearby bench smiled at Emma as she approached. The woman was in her mid-30s, wearing a weathered coat and a scarf, her eyes kind but wary. "Hello," the woman said softly. "You look like you could use some company." Emma smiled back, sitting down on the bench beside her. "I suppose I could." The woman chuckled, her voice carrying a touch of weariness. "I see you around here sometimes. You're the one who helped start that big project for the homeless, right?" Emma nodded, surprised that anyone would recognize her. "Yeah, that's me." The woman studied her for a moment, and then her eyes softened. "You look different now. More at peace, maybe." Emma hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I guess I'm just trying to find myself again." The woman nodded knowingly. "It's easy to lose yourself when you're trying to save the world. But sometimes, the best way to help the world is to take care of yourself first. The words hit Emma with the force of a revelation. She had spent so long trying to fix the brokenness around her, trying to help others, that she had forgotten to tend to her own soul. She had been so wrapped up in the mission that she had neglected the very thing that had fueled that mission in the first place, her heart. "I think I'm starting to understand that," Emma said quietly. "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I can make a difference by being true to myself." The woman smiled warmly. "You've already made a difference, just by being here, just by caring. That's all any of us can really do." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude for the simple wisdom of the woman sitting beside her. In that moment, she knew she wasn't alone in her journey. There were people, countless people, who understood exactly what she was going through. They weren't powerful or famous, but they had something far more important: authenticity. For the rest of the afternoon, Emma and the woman talked about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. There was no agenda, no expectation. Just two people connecting in the most real and genuine way. Emma had missed that kind of simplicity. It reminded her that sometimes the most meaningful moments came from the most unexpected places. That evening, Emma sat down at her desk to work on a new project, one that she hadn't even thought about in months. The idea was simple. She wanted to create a program that would provide not only shelter for the homeless, but also a sense of community. She wanted to offer a place where people could rebuild their lives, not just survive. It wasn't about charity, it was about empowerment. As she began to draft plans, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't going to be about politics, about fame, or about the people who had tried to mold her into something she wasn't. This was about the individuals she had met along the way, the ones who had taught her the true meaning of resilience and love. The woman chuckled, her voice carrying a touch of weariness. "I see you around here sometimes. You're the one who helped start that big project for the homeless, right?" Emma nodded, surprised that anyone would recognize her. "Yeah, that's me." The woman studied her for a moment, and then her eyes softened. "You look different now. More at peace, maybe." Emma hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I guess I'm just trying to find myself again." The woman nodded knowingly. It's easy to lose yourself when you're trying to save the world. But sometimes, the best way to help the world is to take care of yourself first. The words hit Emma with the force of a revelation. She had spent so long trying to fix the brokenness around her, trying to help others, that she had forgotten to tend to her own soul. She had been so wrapped up in the mission that she had neglected the very thing that had fueled that mission in the first place, her heart. "I think I'm starting to understand that," Emma said quietly. "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I can make a difference by being true to myself." The woman smiled warmly. "You've already made a difference, just by being here, just by caring. That's all any of us can really do." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude for the simple wisdom of the woman sitting beside her. In that moment, she knew she wasn't alone in her journey. There were people, countless people, who understood exactly what she was going through. They weren't powerful or famous, but they had something far more important: authenticity. For the rest of the afternoon, Emma and the woman talked about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. There was no agenda, no expectation. Just two people connecting in the most real and genuine way. Emma had missed that kind of simplicity. It reminded her that sometimes the most meaningful moments came from the most unexpected places. That evening, Emma sat down at her desk to work on a new project, one that she hadn't even thought about in months. The idea was simple. She wanted to create a program that would provide not only shelter for the homeless, but also a sense of community. She wanted to offer a place where people could rebuild their lives, not just survive. It wasn't about charity, it was about empowerment. As she began to draft plans, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't going to be about politics, about fame, or about the people who had tried to mold her into something she wasn't. This was about the individuals she had met along the way, the ones who had taught her the true meaning of resilience and love. The next day, Emma reached out to Lily and told her about the new program she had in mind. Lily was immediately on board, offering her help and support without hesitation. Together, they began reaching out to organizations, shelters, and local businesses that might be interested in collaborating. Emma had no idea where the project would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't concerned with the outcome. She was just doing what felt right. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued to try and reach her. Emma had made it clear she needed space, but he wasn't one to take no for an answer. He sent emails, left messages, and even showed up at her apartment unannounced. He was persistent, but Emma knew deep down that it wasn't because he cared about her. It was because he wanted her back in the game, to play by his rules. One evening, as Emma was leaving the cafe after meeting with Lily, she saw Jonathan waiting by her car. His arms were crossed, his face stern. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, his voice commanding. Emma felt a surge of anxiety rise in her chest, but she held her ground. "I've already told you how I feel, Jonathan. You can't just walk away from everything you've worked for," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You're throwing away a chance to change the world." Emma looked at him, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But for the first time, she wasn't swayed. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing to make a difference in a way that's true to who I am. And I won't let anyone, least of all you, convince me otherwise." Jonathan took a step forward, his eyes searching hers. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." "I don't think I will," Emma replied, her voice steady. "Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to walk away from something that doesn't align with who you are. But I'm doing it because I believe in something bigger. And I believe in myself." Jonathan's face hardened, but Emma didn't flinch. She had made her choice, and she knew it was the right one. The time for playing the game was over. Now, it was time to build something real, something lasting, something that came from the heart. As Jonathan turned and walked away, Emma felt a sense of liberation fill her chest. She had taken back her power, and in doing so, she had found the courage to create the change she had always dreamed of on her own terms. Tomorrow, she would begin her new journey. The world wasn't ready for the shift she was about to make, but it didn't matter. Emma was ready, and that was all that mattered. As Emma continued to shape her new project, the days seemed to blur into one another, each filled with small triumphs and inevitable setbacks. The excitement she had once felt in the face of a well-organized campaign was replaced by a more grounded sense of purpose. This time, there were no lofty speeches or headlines to chase. It was about real, tangible change, a change that would take time, effort, and an unwavering belief in her cause. She spent countless hours meeting with local community leaders, attending town halls, and speaking to those who had experienced homelessness firsthand. There were moments of frustration, like when a potential donor backed out at the last minute, or when a well-meaning politician spoke over her at a press conference. But Emma was used to fighting. She had done it for years. This time, though, she wasn't fighting for her career or recognition. She was fighting for a real opportunity to make a difference. One day, while meeting with a group of social workers at a community center, Emma received a call from her lawyer. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the number. "Emma, I need to speak with you about something urgent," the lawyer said, his voice serious. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her heart racing. "We've just received word that your nonprofit is under investigation," he replied, each word laced with tension. "There are allegations that your organization has been mismanaging funds, using resources improperly. We need to discuss what this means for you." The world seemed to tilt for a moment as Emma processed the news. The walls she had been slowly building around her new project were now under threat. She had worked tirelessly, with her heart and soul, to create something meaningful, and now someone was trying to tear it all down. "Are you sure this is legitimate?" Emma asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound composed. "We're still gathering the details, but it looks like someone has gone public with accusations." "This could get messy, Emma," the lawyer warned. "I need you to stay calm and think carefully. We'll need to take immediate action." She hung up, her hands shaking. The accusations felt like a slap to the face. She had dedicated herself to doing the right thing, and now it seemed that someone wanted to destroy her efforts. But there was no time to waste on anger. Emma knew what she had to do. She immediately reached out to Lily, explaining the situation. Together, they began gathering information, reaching out to their contacts in the nonprofit world, and organizing a response. The accusations were vague, and no one had yet provided any concrete evidence, but the mere suggestion of wrongdoing was enough to damage their reputation. Emma couldn't afford to let the smear campaign gain any traction. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings with journalists, strategizing with her legal team, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in her personal life. But through it all, Emma held on to one thought: I will not let this define me. She remembered the conversations she had had with people who had fallen through the cracks of society. The homeless woman in the park, the children playing on the swings, the families who had lost everything. They had faced far worse than this, and if they could rise above it, so could she. One evening, after a long day of dealing with media inquiries, Emma sat alone in her apartment. The city lights twinkled through the window, and the hum of the streets below felt distant, like it belonged to another world. She had come so far, but now she faced a test. Was she strong enough to keep going? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Emma opened it to find Lily standing there, holding a bag of takeout and a large coffee. I figured you might need a break, Lily said with a grin, her eyes bright despite the chaos that had surrounded them. You've been burning the candle at both ends. Emma managed to smile and let her in. You're a lifesaver. They sat at the small dining table, eating in silence for a few moments before Emma spoke up. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. Lily set her chopsticks down and looked at Emma with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. You've always done the right thing, Emma. You've stayed true to yourself, even when the world around you tried to pull you in different directions. And that's why you're still standing. You're not going to let a few accusations stop you now. Emma exhaled slowly, taking in Lily's words. It was exactly what she needed to hear. Her path had never been easy, and she knew this was just another challenge to overcome. She had faced obstacles before, but this time, it felt different. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everything she believed in. The next morning, Emma gave a press conference. Her voice was steady as she addressed the accusations head-on. She didn't hide behind legal jargon or vague statements. She spoke from the heart. I've spent my life working to help those in need, she began, her voice ringing out clearly. My organization has always been dedicated to transparency, to ensuring that every penny we raise goes directly to those who need it most. These allegations are unfounded, and I am committed to proving that. This is not just my fight. It's the fight of everyone who believes in making a difference, no matter how hard it gets. The media's reaction was swift. Some outlets criticized her, calling it an attempt at damage control, while others applauded her directness and integrity. But Emma didn't focus on the noise. She knew that the truth would eventually come out, and she was prepared to fight for it. Over the next few weeks, Emma worked tirelessly to uncover the source of the accusations. She and her team dug into every detail, leaving no stone unturned. And, slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. It turned out that the allegations had been fabricated by a rival organization looking to undermine Emma's progress. A former associate, disillusioned with the way Emma's nonprofit had evolved, had spread rumors in a bid to sabotage her work. With this information, Emma was able to clear her name. The legal team filed a lawsuit against the individual responsible for the smear campaign, and the press began to report the truth. But the damage had already been done. The trust Emma had built with her supporters had been shaken, and some donors pulled their funding, uncertain whether they could continue to back her cause. It was a setback, but Emma wasn't defeated. She knew that rebuilding the trust of the people was going to take time. She would have to prove herself all over again, and she was ready. By the time the dust began to settle, Emma's focus had shifted from defending her name to focusing on the people who truly mattered, those who had believed in her from the start. She started by visiting the shelters, talking to the families, the individuals, and the communities she had promised to serve. They were her true supporters, and no smear campaign could take that away. She had passed the test, and though the journey was far from over, Emma knew she had the strength to see it through. The battle for her future wasn't just about reputation. It was about heart, and Emma's heart had never been more resolute. Months had passed since the storm of accusations had threatened to destroy everything Emma had worked for. The dust had finally settled, but the scars of the battle remained, visible in the tense lines around her eyes and the occasional fatigue in her voice. The nonprofit had survived, but it had been through the kind of crisis that would break most organizations. Yet, Emma had come out of it stronger. She had faced the fire and not only endured, but emerged with a deeper sense of purpose. Her relationship with Lily had only grown stronger during this time. They had spent countless late nights working together, strategizing how to rebuild trust and credibility with their supporters. Together, they worked tirelessly to re-engage donors, rebuild relationships with community leaders, and, most importantly, continue to focus on the core mission of the nonprofit, helping those who had nowhere else to turn. Emma had spent months traveling across the country, speaking at conferences, visiting shelters, and meeting the people she had dedicated her life to. Everywhere she went, she heard the same thing. People wanted to feel seen, heard, and supported. They didn't want charity. They wanted a real chance to rebuild. Emma's vision for her program had always been rooted in that understanding. But now, after the scandal, it felt even more urgent. One evening, as she sat in a small, modest cafe in New Orleans, Emma reflected on how far she had come. She had never imagined her life would take this path, but every challenge, every setback, had led her to a place of greater understanding. She had been through the storm, and now, she was beginning to see the rainbow. Lily joined her, bringing the evening's dinner and a much-needed distraction. They sat at their usual table, sharing stories about the day's meetings and upcoming plans. They laughed together, their easy camaraderie a stark contrast to the tense moments they had faced just a few months ago. "You know," Lily said between bites of her sandwich, "I think we've really done it. I mean, we're not back to where we were before. Maybe we never will be. But we're making progress." Emma smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't realized she had been missing. "It's not about going back to where we were. It's about moving forward. We're building something new, something better. We've learned from the past, but we can't let it define us." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly. I've seen the way you've changed, Emma. You've gone from trying to fix everything to really understanding what needs to be done. You're leading with your heart." Emma paused, reflecting on her friend's words. "I don't think I could have led any other way. After everything, after all the mistakes I made, it was clear to me that I couldn't fix the world, but I could be a part of it. A real part, not just someone trying to prove something." There was a long pause between them as they both let the weight of their journey settle in. The journey wasn't over, but they had learned that even the greatest challenges could become the most valuable lessons. Emma realized she had changed not because of what had happened to her, but because of the way she had faced it head-on, without running away, without compromising her values. In the weeks that followed, the nonprofit began to recover, slowly but surely. More donors came back on board, and new partnerships were formed with organizations that shared Emma's vision. Her program, which had once seemed like an impossible dream, was finally gaining traction. The homeless who had once been invisible to society were starting to find the help they so desperately needed. Emma's initiative was no longer just an idea, it was becoming a movement. But the challenges were far from over. Emma knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles. There would always be people who doubted her, people who tried to tear down what she was building. But now, she understood that their voices were just noise. The only thing that mattered was the impact she was making, one life at a time. One afternoon, as Emma sat in her office, reviewing the progress of the program, she received a call that she hadn't expected. It was from Jonathan. "I heard about the progress you're making," he said, his voice more subdued than usual. "I just wanted to say, I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd be able to turn things around after everything that happened." Emma was quiet for a moment. She had expected this call, but she wasn't sure how to respond. Jonathan had been a significant part of her life once, but his vision for her future no longer aligned with her own. "Thank you," Emma said finally. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm doing what I believe in, and that's enough for me." There was a brief silence on the other end before Jonathan spoke again. "I'm glad to hear that. You've always had the heart for this work, Emma. I guess I didn't realize how much it mattered to you." Emma sighed, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "It's not just about the work anymore, Jonathan. It's about the people. It's about helping them find a way out, a way to live with dignity. Jonathan's voice softened. I think I finally understand that. As they hung up, Emma felt a strange sense of closure. She had made her peace with the past, and now she could look toward the future with confidence. There was no turning back, but that was exactly what she needed. She was no longer the person who sought validation from others. She was Emma Carter, a woman who had discovered her own strength and was using it to help those who needed it most. The future was uncertain, but Emma knew one thing for sure. She was ready for it. With Lily by her side, her team working tirelessly, and the love and trust of the people who had supported her from the start, Emma felt unstoppable. She wasn't just building a program or a nonprofit. She was building a future where everyone had a place to call home, a future where hope wasn't just a distant dream, but a reality. And for the first time in years, Emma smiled. The road ahead would be long, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced the hardest battles, and she had won. Now, she was ready for whatever came next.